Hi, I'm Jordyn. This week at LivingFelt on Woolly Wednesday, we're going to be making this sweetheart peppermint ornament. I just love peppermints. I love to decorate my Christmas tree and my whole house in peppermints. This sweet little ornament comes together so quickly. It's a great beginner project, especially here for the holidays. And it's going to be focusing quite a bit on making these detailed fine lines and giving them crisp, clean edges. I use them as little gift tags on bags. You can decorate your whole tree with these little ornaments, and you can put different variations on the peppermints too. I've also included a few other patterns for your peppermints as well. Let's take a look at the supplies. For our wool, we've got about 1/2 ounce of core wool per peppermint. We have a white wool that we're going to be wrapping our core in. For the reds, I'm using MC1 Vintage Red. You could also use True Red. And then we have this beautiful heathered rose petal here. If you didn't have this, you could just blend up your own. I'll be felting on my Wow pad. I'll also be using a Wowie topper in white to keep the white very clean. For needles, I'll be using a 42 triangle, a 38 spiral, and a cluster of 42 triangles. I'll also use a doll needle, awl, fine scissors, tweezers, a dowel, and I'm also going to be using a marker. This is optional. Finally, to string up our ornament, I like to use an elastic little cord. To start, we will take a long strip of core wool. This one's a little thick, so we will split it in two. We want our thickness to be about an inch, 1.25 at most. Then I'm going to take my skewer, and I'm going to work in the middle of the skewer. I'll start spinning the wool around the skewer to get it started, and grab onto that wool and continue spinning until it builds up a little more. Keeping it tight to the skewer at this point. As it starts to grow bigger, I'll loosen up a little bit. It doesn't need to be super tight here, and keep wrapping. Once I get to the end of this core wool length, I will needle felt it down just a little bit. And we'll grab our second length of core wool. Tack this one down with a few pokes and continue wrapping. It can be a little loose here. Wrap that all the way to the end of the core wool, tack down the ends of the second wrap, and then point your skewer downwards towards the wow mat and slide the core wool off, keeping pressure downward. We'll start needle felting in the very center and go outwards in a circle pattern. Flip it over and do the same thing on this side. You want to keep downward pressure throughout this process while you're felting on both sides. Flip it back over and go outwards in a radiating pattern, needle felting a little bit more, and repeat on the other side. So now we've created a little bed that we've needle felted on both sides, and it's getting a little more firm in the center, but the edges are still very loose and fluffy. We're going to take our 38 spiral needle, and right now all of our layers are kind of just right here in a spiral, so if we were to push up or down, it kind of separates, and we don't want that. So we'll use our 38 spiral and just do a little bit of poking on the sides here, just to kind of get those layers to tack to each other a little bit more and provide a little bit more strength. Once we've got a nice little pad of needle felted section here in the middle and our edges are fluffy, we can start to pull the edges over the corner and into the center of the peppermint. Take a few fingers and pull that in and needle felt it down. Rotate the peppermint around, needle felting each edge over and in towards the center. Don't focus your needle too long in any one spot. You may develop some ridges, just needle felt those out and push all the wool down into the center. Flip your peppermint over and do the same thing on this side. If you find you have a lot of excess wool in the center, you can tear some off and just needle felt down all the extra wispy bits until they're flat. Your peppermint will be gaining density in the center, but the edges will still be quite fluffy. It's probably about 3 inches across right now in diameter. We want to shrink that down just a little bit and firm up these edges. We are going to take our cluster of needles and needle felt around the outside, starting in the very center. Just one pass around the side of the peppermint. It'll start to indent a little bit, looking kind of like an ice cream sandwich. Needle felt from that center line around the corner, smoothing it out, and back to the face of the peppermint. Do this along all one face side of the peppermint first. To keep your shape very rounded and equal, keep moving your needle around the side, not spending too much time in one space, and keeping the circle going. Just make sure all those fluffy bits are felted down. It doesn't need to be extremely, extremely firm right here. You can see that one side looks much more rounded and the other is still very fluffy and yet to be done. Flip your peppermint over and do the same. As you needle felt around and around the peppermint, it'll gradually firm itself up. Once you've finished the second side, give your peppermint a squeeze from both faces and go around the edge. You don't have to stay in the center, you can do the whole edge. Put your peppermint face down and make sure to needle felt those face sides very nice and smooth so they have a nice finish on them. Needle felting out all those lumps and bumps. Get right over top of your peppermint and give it a spin and a check to make sure it's looking circular from both sides. And also check the side angle to make sure it looks the same thickness. It's firming up a lot more here. It's definitely more firm in the center. And the corners are still a little bit of room, and that's okay. As far as the size, this is about the shape of a hockey puck, a little bit smaller. Almost the same width as well, probably about 1 inch thick. And for a reference, it weighs about 0.4 to half an ounce. Now we're going to cover our peppermint in white wool. This one's a little thick, so I'm actually going to split it. You don't really need a very thick coverage for this. Choose the side that has the least vegetable matter showing and make that the outside of your peppermint. Pop your peppermint right in the middle of your white. Take one side and wrap it over one face of the peppermint, just so it's barely going over that edge. Tack that down along the face of the peppermint and a little bit over the side. Provide tension on that wool just a little bit and wrap your peppermint with one layer of your white wool and tear off any excess. Start by needle felting the white wool down on the faces of the peppermint and around the corners to the sides. We have a piece of vegetable matter here that you can see. If I try to pick it out now, it might tear the wool apart, so I'll wait until it's a little bit more felted. Once the faces of the peppermint are needle felted white, make sure to get the sides all needle felted down and smooth. When smoothing out this white wool, it helps to have a bright light in your space so you can really tell where those poke holes are where you've already tacked it down and where the airy bits are where you still need to. Where you have all this wool bunched up here, tear off what you think you won't need and then needle felt it down. Be mindful as you're needle felting around your peppermint to not spend too much time in any one place, or else you'll end up with an indent that you won't like. Always be considering that shape. If you find you can see a little bit of the core wool peeking through, just patch a little bit more white in. So now that our face is a little more felted, we can go ahead and pick this vegetable matter out without disturbing too much wool. It's okay if you're wool has vegetable matter, you really only need to pick it out or worry about it when it's on your final design layer, which this is. When applying the white layer, make sure to always be considering your circle and work around your edges to keep that shape. Don't spend too long in any one area or else you'll make a dent in your peppermint. It's looking nice and round and even thickness from the sides. Our peppermint is covered in white and is ready for a sweet design. There's a diagram of a few different peppermint patterns you might try in the kit. We're going to be making this sweetheart, but if you were looking for something a little more simple, you might try this little one or make a spiral or something else. You might take it in your own direction. I like to use this marker here. It's a permanent marker ultra fine point, and I like it to outline the heart and the major lines here, the 4 major lines. But that is an optional step. I'll start with the heart. Find the center of your circle with a dull needle. Eyeball it at first. You can kind of give it a little roll. If it's bouncing a lot, that means it's not in the center, but mine's pretty smooth. That means it's good and centered. I'm going to take my pen, and my heart is about 1/2 inch from this tip to that tip. So I'm going to mimic that here. I'll just do about a little dot here and a little dot here. It may be hard to see, but honestly, you don't want your dots to show up too much. From here, I will start to make my heart. And this is just a rough shape we can, of course, refine when we felt it down. Using these dots as an outline, I'm then going to needle felt vintage red in a thin strip all the way around the heart. To do this, I will take a very thin piece, maybe 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch thick of the vintage red. I'll dry felt this between my hands and up against the wow mat, and we have this nice length that we can work with for not only our heart, but some of our minor lines later on. I'll snip off the edge here and get a blunt edge to the red, and I'll start here at the bottom of the heart. Give a few pokes to anchor it in, and work your way around the lines. You can pull the fiber a little bit to draft it out, and really you want to start by needle felting a single line right over that dotted line into your vintage red. Once you have that first line down, you can come back over and continue tacking the rest of the thickness of the line down in there. Along the edges, give your needle the tiniest bit of a drag. Not too much because you don't want to bend your needle, but just drag those stray fibers along that edge and poke them into place. Having the dull needle in the center helps me to just spin the peppermint and let me needle felt it at an ideal angle. Tear off any excess that you have here, and we'll go back around the heart. So here's the start of our heart. As you can see, it's not perfect. That's okay. We see a little bit of our marker marks. Any stray fibers or markers that we see here, we can cover with our design. In fact, I see that we're going to have a large line coming off of here on the top right side of the heart, so that'll cover this up very nicely. Really what you want to focus on most here is the inside of the heart, because this will be where the crisp red meets the white, and you really want that to be refined. So spend a moment here and really focus on those edges where the inside meets the heart outline. For this little sweetheart peppermint design, we have 4 major lines coming off of each side, split by 4 minor red lines, and then between every one of those pairs is a rose petal line. We'll be making quite a few of these little lines throughout this peppermint. Quite a repetitive process, but that makes it easy to create quite a beautiful design in that peppermint swirl. I'll start here at the top because it's a very obvious spot of where it's coming out, the dead center of the top of the heart. I want to make sure that I'm establishing a nice swirly pattern, so I will dot the lines out a little bit to the left and curl it back towards the right. These dotted lines here, I like to draw them in skinnier than the eventual design will be, just so they don't peek out past where I want them, and I can kind of adjust as I'm drawing. I'm also starting much narrower towards the center of the heart and letting the lines get a little bit wider when they approach the sides of the peppermint. Again, I'm only drawing in these major lines, and they will serve as reference for the next step, but also guidelines for when I fill in those large lines. With these dots in place on the front face of our peppermint, we're going to figure out where they end up on the back. To do that, I will use the dull needle again. I'm going to poke through the peppermint straight down, right where this line will meet the heart, and flip it over. Where it comes through, make a very small, but still you can tell where it is, dot on the back side. You'll do this for all 4 spots where those major lines meet your heart on the front. And you'll end up with, hopefully, about a square on the back. Let's say we have north, south, east, and west major lines. Where you poked through this one, your eastern line, on the back, is where your northern line is going to end up. So this line will track, we can faux it in here with this wool, we'll track a little bit left, and then down, and then converge towards the center of that line. When it's completed, you'll have this line going off to the east, circling down, and then it comes up here, and it'll connect kind of in the southwest side of the back of the peppermint. It's kind of just making that twist happen with all of those yummy red bits of the peppermint. If you like, you can draw in those lines all the way around, but still you want to draw your lines in a little bit thinner than what the stripes are going to end up looking like. This point right here is the one we're aiming for. So once we get to this face side of the peppermint, I will start narrowing this dotted line into that point. Still has a little bit of a curve. And we'll go ahead and do that on all 4. You can check on your backside here that it's starting to look like it's coming out in a spiral. And on the backside, well, there won't be a heart. It will just converge into a point. So while we've drawn in our major lines, I'm actually starting with these minor lines that will come off the center of the heart and split the difference between the middle of our major lines, following the same curve that the major lines will. The major lines are just drawn in at this point, but the first lines we will be making are our minor solid lines. Let's start with this one that's coming off the top right of the heart. It'll be splitting right between these 2 lines, following the same pattern in the swirl. You can overlap the heart a little bit or needle felt it right under that edge. We'll start with making a single line of needle poking down the length of your fiber. Make sure those needle pokes are following the direction of your sketched in major lines. Once you get to the edge of the face, go ahead and thin those lines by poking into the center even more, gathering that fiber from the edges into that thin line. You can make the tip of the line here a little bit more narrow as it's terminating into the center. Your minor lines will be the same thickness as they travel their way around the mint. Once you've got the bulk of the line felted down into place, we want to drag our needle along those lines where the red meets the white, so it creates a crisp line where those 2 meet. You'll continue this process down the side, keeping that angle right between the 2. The way you needle felt these lines will be very much like you needle felted the heart, right around the same thickness. Here on the back face of the peppermint, once it crosses this corner, I'll start tracking it in the same way in that single line until it gets right about to the center. We'll terminate the line into a point just before it gets to that center mark. When needle felting along these edges, you need to be very intentional with every single poke. One stray poke could put a whole bunch of red into the white, and then you have to dig it out, and it's kind of hard to do that. So dragging along these edges and poking into the red will help make those lines very crisp and avoid too much of the red bleeding into the white. Once you've completely needle felted your red line in, you can take a look and see if the white wool is kind of bunching up right next to it, creating a little bit of a hill next to that, a little bit of a valley, just a tiny bit. Go ahead and give some pokes with your 42 triangle just along that ridge to needle felt it down to the same level of density that is right next to it, basically. You don't want to do this until your red line is all the way needle felted in, because you might spread some red into your white if you don't. You don't have to go too far with that, because we'll be adding in a line here between where our major line will go and this minor line. Once you're happy with this minor red line, you're going to go ahead and do that between all of the 4 major line divisions. Some of the spaces may look like they have more room than others, and that's okay. Candy's not perfect, felting isn't perfect. Just do what you can, and we will come back in with those lines and make it look beautiful. I've jumped ahead a little bit and completed some of these lines, but now we'll go and do one of these major lines. This is the piece that we dry felted that we used for the minor lines. So we're going to double the thickness of that to do the major lines. That's all right there. Maybe a little thick right here at the end, so I'll draft it out a little bit. This is going to be way more than we need, but we can use them for multiple lines. Start with a nice blunt edge here, still using our single needle. This one will come out of the very top of the heart, track to the left a little bit, and then curve around to the other side. Where this line meets the heart, bring it into a little bit more of a point, so that line is narrower, more towards the center of the peppermint. Where before, on our minor lines, we poked in a single line mostly, this time we're going to do a little bit more like 2 lines. Go right over where you've drawn and start with one line, needle felting it right over that red marker that you made before. Then approach the other side of the line. Spread that fiber with your needle so that it goes over and covers and maybe even extends beyond that marker line that you made. As you work your way from the center to the outside of the peppermint, your line will begin to thicken. Keep an eye where your markers are. Once I've got the fiber to the edge of the face, I'll go back and needle felt it flat, felting between those 2 lines that I've made. I can go back and clean up any of my lines by doing the little drag poke combination, and continue this method all the way around the side of the peppermint and around the back. And once we get to this peppermint side, the stripe will be at its widest width. So you want to keep a uniform thickness along this edge of the peppermint, and then track it back a little bit smaller towards the terminating point on the back. So for example, this one that's complete is thin, it gets thicker, its thickest point should be on the sides, and then it starts to thin out on the back. You'll notice I'm poking the left and right sides of this line, and it's very puffy up here. There's a lot of wool there. That's okay. We want these lines to be dense and rich with that color. When you start approaching the center where you want it to thin out, you can tear some fiber off, or I just like to cut it. So here you can see I have a little, it's not the most symmetrical thing here. You can work to push the red back into place with some very strategic pokes. And also, if you didn't like the way that this one was shaped, it's a little flat, you can extend the red a little bit beyond and into that white to make that curve a little better. Continue needle felting in your major and minor lines, and then your rose petal minor lines between your vintage red ones. Really only one major difference here with the rose petal, and that's when you tack it down, you want to bury the edge under the vintage red heart that you have. You don't want the rose petal to overlap any of that red. Just as we have with our other minor lines, hold a little tension and needle felt the center of that line. Once you have all of these vintage red lines in, it becomes a lot more easier to tell where your center is between these two lines all the way around. Try to make it so that there's even amounts of white on each side, but if there's not, that's okay too. Right here it's kind of veering off to the right a little bit more, so I'll just push it back into place. Scoop that wool and needle felt it in the right spot. This rose petal has such a nice variegation that when working on the edges, you don't have to put as much attention into them because there's a little bit of white in this, and it will just kind of help merge that edge very cleanly on its own. Once you get towards the center, snip off any excess. Here in the back where all these lines are converging, it might look a little messy, that's okay, it's just the back of the peppermint, but if you like, you can take a little spot of red, roll it up into a little ball, and finish it off with a red spot in the center that everything kind of connects to. There's the back, and now here's the front. It's looking fantastic! Now that all of these lines are in, some shifting might have occurred with your heart in the center. So just give that a pass. Make sure all your lines are super crisp and exactly where you want them. Move any stray fibers that might have landed there out of the way. And make sure that center of the heart is a nice clean white. The last thing we have to do is to string up our peppermint. I'm using a silver wrapped elastic cord for this. String it through a needle with a thick enough eye. Feed it through the very top of your peppermint, right in the center of the thickness. Where it goes in and out only really needs to be like half an inch, maybe even less apart. Give your cord a double knot and pull it tight. Now we want to bury this knot inside the peppermint, so we'll take our awl, dig a little hole next to one of the sides of the string, and rotate our string and pull it through so that the knot is inside the peppermint. Now our ornament is ready to put on the tree. Here's a look at our completed Sweetheart Peppermint. Very cute. Another idea that you could do with this is to make a chocolate mint, or perhaps one of a different pattern. For this one, I just covered it in brown wool instead of white, and then I took some green strips, pre-felted them on a pad, and then secured them to the sides. I did 5 strips around, and I also made them a little bit more narrow once they come in onto the face of the peppermint. That one is a super easy method. But I just love the way that all these swirls just really make it look so sweet. And there's our peppermint ornament, all complete, ready to go on the tree. It's so swirly and sweet. I just love it. Thank you for joining me in my first tutorial here at LivingFelt. I'm usually on the other side of the camera, so it was very fun to be over here and teach you guys something sweet and fun. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you next time. Of course, if you make a peppermint of your own, we want to see what you do. If you have any fun new designs, post them in our Facebook group, LivingFelt Friends. We have more holiday fun for you right here in this playlist, or you can browse our whole library of felting tutorials at livingfelt.com/learn. Bye guys, see you next time.